So I want you to put yourself in the trauma bay of a busy emergency department. It's, let's say it's 2 a.m.
Oh, yeah. Always 2 a.m.
Right. The absolute peak hours for this. The double doors swing open and paramedics rush in with a young patient.
And it's usually chaos.
Total chaos. They've got, a shattered femur, maybe multiple rib fractures, and a traumatic brain injury from a really high-speed motor vehicle crash.
Yeah.
And if you are the clinician standing at the foot of that bed, your entire universe just shrinks, right? It shrinks down to the immediate acute event.
It has to. I mean,
Yeah.
your training kicks in immediately. You're looking at vital signs. You're securing the airway. You're just trying to stop the bleeding.
Exactly. And the clinical reflex in that moment is to view this shattered femur as this isolated incident, like it's a tragic random stroke of bad luck.
A bolt of lightning.
Yes, a bolt of lightning that just, happened to strike this specific person on this specific highway at 2 a.m.
But, and this is the core of it, to truly understand public health and injury prevention, we have to completely dismantle that fatalistic mindset.
We really do.
Because an injury is never just a random bolt of lightning. It's a highly predictable, mathematically measurable physics equation.
Right.
It is simply the exact millisecond where transferred energy exceeds the physical tolerance of human tissue. That's it. That is the entirety of the event.
I love that framing. Because if we can reframe injury as a predictable physics equation, then public health suddenly becomes this upstream engineering designed to disrupt that equation before it ever happens.
Exactly.
While the trauma surgery is simply the downstream rescue operation after the equation has already run its devastating course.
Yeah. And that shifts from the micro to the macro. That's the entire foundation of what we're doing today in this deep dive.
It really is.
When you're standing in that trauma bay, you're looking at the end result of a massive systemic failure. You're basically looking at the final domino. So today, we're going to walk backward up the chain to see exactly who pushed the first one.
And for those of you listening, especially if you're medical students or, junior doctors or public health trainees, you know that the structural spine of our deep dive today is chapter 9.4 of the Oxford textbook of Global Public Health.
And we should be clear, we aren't just going to sit here and read you the textbook.
No, definitely not.
We want to build out the three-dimensional conceptual frameworks that actually sit behind those pages. We need to move seamlessly from risk to exposure to outcome to intervention, and then finally to system impact.
Right, so consider this your active companion guide. You can read the numbers on the page yourself, but we want to strengthen the clinical and systemic reasoning that makes those numbers matter.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to jump straight in because the scale of this problem, it just forces a complete reevaluation of how society views trauma.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we really have to strip the word accident out of our vocabulary entirely.
We do, because, the word accident implies unpredictability.
Oh.
It implies this act of fate that literally no human intervention could have stopped.
Right.
And when you look at the 2010 global burden of disease data, calling this an accident is just statistically absurd.
Yeah, let's talk about those numbers for a second.
So we are talking about injuries causing over 5 million deaths every single year.
5 million?
5 million. To put that in perspective for you, that is nearly 10% of all human deaths globally.
That is it's staggering.
It is. And if we look at morbidity, the years of healthy life lost to disability, which we measure in days.
Right. Disability-adjusted life years.
Exactly. Injuries account for more than 11% of the entire global burden.
And I think the most devastating part of that metric is actually who is bearing the brunt of it.
Yes, demographics.
Because this isn't a disease of the elderly, like certain cardiovascular conditions or, neurodegenerative diseases. This is stripping away decades of human potential.
Right. It's hitting the youth.
Exactly. If you look at children under 14 years of age, the leading causes of death are just this horrifying roster of trauma. It's road traffic injuries, drowning, fires, poisoning, interpersonal violence, and war.
All the top 10.
All of them sitting right there in the top 10.
Which is exactly why public health has to categorize and compartmentalize the violence. You simply cannot solve a 5 million death problem without a taxonomy.
Right. You need a system.
So the very first line we draw in the sand, like the most fundamental differentiation in injury epidemiology is between intentional and unintentional injuries.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So intentional injuries are driven by a clear, premeditated desire to cause harm.
Like someone actively deciding to hurt someone else.
Exactly, or themselves. So this includes harm directed inward, like self-harm and suicide, and harm directed outward, like interpersonal violence, homicide, or collective violence, like war. Unintentional injuries, on the other hand, occur without that direct psychological intent to commit harm. Even if, and this is key, even if the action leading to the injury was reckless.
Wait, let me stop you right there, because this is where the terminology heavily conflicts with, I think, our societal and our legal instincts.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Right. Take a drunk driver. Someone consumes 10 drinks, they get behind the wheel of a 2-ton vehicle, they run a red light, and they kill a pedestrian.
Yep.
You are telling me that public health classifies that as an unintentional injury, because from a legal standpoint, that driver is facing vehicular manslaughter or gross negligence. I mean, it feels like calling it unintentional lets them off the hook morally.
It's a profound friction point, I agree. Legally and morally, that driver is absolutely culpable. There's no debate there.
Right.
But public health operates on a completely different frequency. We have to separate the underlying cause of the event from the specific intent of the outcome.
Okay, but why?
Well, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, along with the American Public Health Association, they actually established this strict distinction back in the 1990s for a very specific operational reason, which is, think about it, the intoxicated driver made a grossly negligent, totally illegal decision to drive. However, they did not leave the bar with the premeditated, specific psychological intent to hunt down and murder that exact pedestrian as an act of assault.
Okay, I see the distinction. It's like if a sniper shoots someone, the intent was the bullet entering that specific body.
Precisely.
But the drunk driver just created this massive wave of kinetic danger, and the pedestrian just happened to be in the path.
Exactly. And here's why that differentiation matters so much for actually saving lives. If we classify that drunk driving death as a unique, intentional act of violent crime, we effectively hand the problem solely to the criminal justice system.
We just lock up the driver after the fact.
Right. But if we classified it as an unintentional road traffic injury, we group it with thousands of other crashes. And that allows us to see the systemic patterns.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It allows us to design broader upstream prevention systems that don't rely on the flawed decision-making of an intoxicated person.
So we aren't just relying on them to be better.
Right. We can engineer better road lighting. We can mandate automatic braking systems in vehicles. We can build separated pedestrian walkways. And we can implement high-visibility sobriety checkpoints. We literally engineer the environment to absorb the human error.
That makes a lot of sense. You're stripping away all the emotional weight of the courtroom to focus purely on the mechanics of the event.
Exactly.
And actually, speaking of mechanics, this leads us right into the epidemiological triad.
Yes, the triad.
For anyone listening who's in medical training, the triad is like day one infectious disease stuff, right? You have the host, the agent, and the environment.
The human, the malaria parasite, and the swamp.
Exactly. But applying a biological model to a car crash, I mean, that requires a bit of an intellectual leap.
It does, until you realize that injury is a disease of physics.
A disease of physics. I like that.
In the injury model, the host remains the human being. The fragile biological vessel,
Sure.
the environment or the reservoir, is the context where the potential danger exists.
Yeah.
So that's the icy highway, the unlit stairwell, the crowded kitchen.
Okay.
But the true conceptual breakthrough here is identifying the agent. The agent is not the car.
Wait, it's not.
No. The agent is not the concrete either. The true agent of the disease of injury is energy.
Energy. Mechanical energy, thermal energy, chemical energy, electrical energy.
Exactly.
It's brilliant. Let's ground this with an analogy, actually. Think about dropping a raw egg onto a kitchen floor.
Okay. Classic physics experiment.
Right. The agent that causes the shell to shatter isn't the linoleum floor itself. The linoleum is just the environment.
Right.
The agent is the kinetic energy that is violently transferred to the egg, the exact millisecond its momentum is stopped by the floor.
That is a perfect distillation. And to build on your egg analogy, we also have to account for how that kinetic energy is delivered to the host.
Okay, how so?
In epidemiology, we talk about vehicles and vectors.
Right.
A vehicle is an inanimate object that facilitates the energy transfer. So that's the motor vehicle, the blade of a knife, the boiling water.
In a vector.
A vector is an animate carrier, like a dog biting a child or a horse kicking a rider.
Okay, so sticking with the physics of the egg. If I drop the egg onto the linoleum, the rapid transfer of kinetic energy easily exceeds the structural tolerance of the calcium carbonate shell.
Yep. and you get a catastrophic failure.
A fractured femur.
Exactly.
But if I drop that exact same egg from the exact same height into a thickly padded box, the egg survives.
Because of host tolerance.
Right. I haven't changed the fundamental physics of the fall. The mass and the velocity are identical,
Right.
but the padded box extends the time of deceleration, absorbing the kinetic energy, and thereby artificially increasing the host tolerance.
And that realization right there is the cornerstone of all injury prevention.
Well,
Injury only occurs when energy transmission exceeds host tolerance. And host tolerance is incredibly dynamic. It can be intrinsically lowered.
Like how?
Well, think about a 70-year-old woman with osteoporosis. She has a fundamentally lower tissue tolerance to mechanical energy than a healthy 20-year-old athlete.
That makes sense.
Or a driver who's fatigued after a 12-hour shift or impaired by alcohol. They've lowered their neurological tolerance and reaction time.
But conversely, as we pointed out with the padded box, we can extrinsically increase host tolerance with protective devices.
Exactly. A motorcycle helmet is literally a padded box for the skull.
A seatbelt and an airbag are padded boxes for the thorax.
Exactly.
You know, viewing injury as a problem of energy transfer is incredibly empowering. It moves us completely out of the realm of human behavioral scolding.
Yes.
We don't have to just stand there yelling at people to stop dropping eggs. We can just engineer a world filled with padded boxes.
That's the dream.
We can modify the vehicle transferring the energy, we can modify the environment where the energy exists, or we can modify the host's ability to withstand it.
But, and this is the big but, to know where to put those padded boxes, we need to know exactly where the eggs are dropping.
Ah, right. Data.
We have established the theoretical physics of causation. Now, we have to transition to the messy reality of measurement. We need surveillance. Because without surveillance, public health is effectively flying completely blind.
Let's talk about that radar system then, because surveillance really is our early warning radar.
It is.
But from reading the Oxford chapter, it seems like our global radar is, well, shockingly inadequate. I mean, the most reliable tool we have across the globe is mortality data, right?
Yeah. Vital statistics, death certificates, coroner reports.
Which is the bedrock of the global burden of disease study. But a death certificate is the ultimate lagging indicator.
oh, 100%.
It only tells you about the absolute worst-case scenario after it has already happened.
Right. Mortality data really only captures the tip of the iceberg. It's crucial, obviously, but it tells a very, very limited story.
Okay, so what else do we have?
Well, in high-income countries, what we call HICs, we have managed to build highly sophisticated, high-resolution radar for fatal events.
Like what? Give me an example.
In the United States, for example, you have the Fatal Accident Reporting System, which is maintained by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
Okay.
And it doesn't just count dead bodies. It tracks the time of day, the weather conditions, the vehicle make and model, the blood alcohol content of the drivers, the road surface type.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that granular surveillance is exactly what allowed engineers to redesign cars to be safer over the last 4 decades. We also have the U.S. Census of Fatal Occupational Injuries, which lets regulators pinpoint exactly which industrial machines or workplace practices are killing people.
But again, that high-resolution radar is only tracking fatalities.
Right.
It's like it's only picking up the massive commercial jets falling out of the sky. What about the massive swarms of smaller aircraft flying right under the radar?
The non-fatal injuries.
Yes. What about the millions of disabling non-fatal injuries? The traumatic brain injuries that leave a young man unable to work, or the severe burns that require years of skin grafts?
Tracking non-fatal injuries is an absolute logistical nightmare.
I can imagine.
You cannot rely on death certificates, obviously. You have to rely on hospital admission data, emergency department logs, or specialized trauma registries like the U.S. National Trauma Data Bank.
But hospital data has to be heavily skewed, right?
Oh, massively.
Yeah.
It only captures the people who actually made it to the hospital.
And I'm guessing it rarely captures the environmental context of the injury.
Exactly. A surgeon notes a fractured tibia, right? But they rarely take the time to write down that the intersection where it happened had a broken streetlight and no crosswalk.
Which means injury data is inherently intersectoral. To get the full picture of just a single car hitting a pedestrian, you need data from 4 completely different universes.
Yep, cat 'em out.
You need the police report for the legal and behavioral context. You need the transport department's data for the road engineering context. You need the hospital's trauma registry for the physiological outcome. And you probably need the insurance company's data for the economic impact.
And trying to link those disparate databases is exactly where the system breaks down. data linkage is plagued by massive, massive hurdles.
Like what? Privacy laws?
Privacy laws protecting medical records, for one. Plus, you have police databases that use completely different software architecture than hospital databases.
Right, they just don't talk to each other.
Exactly. And you have varying definitions of injury severity across sectors. But when you can link them, the insights are profound.
Give me an example of that.
Imagine connecting an upstream population-level behavioral survey like the International Health Behavior in School-Age Children studied directly to a downstream pediatric trauma registry.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Right. Suddenly, you aren't just looking at broken arms. You are looking at how peer pressure, school culture, and substance use at age 14 directly correlate with emergency department admissions at age 16.
That is the absolute dream scenario in a high-income country with, massive servers and data scientists.
Yeah.
But we have to address the massive glaring blind spot here. What happens to this radar in low and middle-income countries, the LMICs?
In many LMICs, the radar isn't just low resolution. It is effectively turned off.
Turned off entirely.
The public health infrastructure is fragile. It's often totally overwhelmed by infectious diseases.
Right, they're dealing with malaria, TB.
Exactly. There's very little tradition of funding specific population-based surveillance systems for injuries outside of basic, often very flawed police reports or vital registries.
So what's the result of that?
The result is a massive systematic underreporting of the problem. When independent researchers actually go into regions like sub-Saharan Africa or rural South Asia and conduct door-to-door population-based surveys,
What do they find?
they consistently find that the true burden of injury is astronomically higher than what the official national statistics claim.
That is terrifying from a policy perspective, because if a government doesn't have the data to prove a problem exists, they aren't going to allocate funding to fix it.
Exactly. Out of sight, out of mind.
But, okay, using the 2010 GBD data we do have, let's zoom out and look at the actual shape of this global crisis. Because the numbers tell an incredibly vivid story about who gets hurt in this world and why.
They do.
We know the baseline, 5 million deaths. 3.7 million are unintentional, 1.35 million are intentional. Let's break down the heavyweights, starting with the biggest killer on the board.
The undisputed heavyweight of unintentional injury is road traffic injuries, RTIs.
Okay.
They account for well over 1 million deaths every single year.
Over a million.
Yeah. And between 1990 and 2010, the global mortality from RTIs surged by 47%.
47%.
Which pushed it to become the 8th leading cause of death worldwide across all ages and diseases.
Wow.
And the demographic clustering is stark. Males account for more than 2/3 of all road traffic deaths globally.
2/3. And we need to unpack why that is, because it isn't just a biological coincidence.
No, not at all.
It's this toxic cocktail of sociological, occupational, and behavioral factors.
Right.
Young males, particularly in that 15 to 29 age bracket, they have developing prefrontal cortices, which makes them inherently more prone to risk-taking and speed.
Yep, the biology is there.
Add in cultural expectations of masculinity that often equate reckless driving with status.
Exactly.
But it's also occupational exposure, isn't it? In many LMICs, young men are the ones driving the commercial trucks, the overloaded minivans, the motorcycle taxis. They are simply on the road more, in more dangerous vehicles for longer hours.
That combination of neurological risk tolerance and sheer environmental exposure is lethal.
It's a perfect storm.
It is. And we see similar male dominance in the second leading cause of unintentional death.
Yeah.
Falls. Falls cause roughly 540,000 deaths annually. And while falls heavily impact the elderly due to frailty, the occupational hazards of construction and manual labor ensure a very high male mortality rate.
Makes sense.
Then we look at drowning, about 350,000 deaths a year. Again, 70% male.
70%.
But the most horrifying statistic hidden within drowning is that over 64,000 of those deaths are children between the ages of 1 and 4.
Oh, wow. 64,000 toddlers. We're definitely going to dive deep into the mechanics of that pediatric drowning crisis in a moment, because the context is vastly different than what a listener in a high-income country might picture.
Radically different.
But before we do, let's look at the one category that completely flips the demographic script. Fire burns.
Yes.
Roughly 330,000 deaths annually. But unlike RTIs, unlike falls or drowning, the majority of fire burn victims are female. About 53%.
And that demographic inversion is a massive, massive signal for public health investigators.
Why are women burning to death at higher rates?
Well, Part of it is environmental exposure in LMICs.
Hmm.
Women are disproportionately responsible for domestic chores, right?
Right.
Spending hours cooking over open flames or unsafe kerosene stoves in cramped, highly flammable living conditions.
That makes tragic sense.
But that environmental explanation brings us to a much darker overlapping issue with our data.
You're talking about the intersection of unintentional burns and intentional interpersonal violence.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
When we look at the official global data for interpersonal violence homicide,
Mm-hmm.
assault, it causes about 450,000 deaths globally.
Okay.
And the official numbers claim that females account for less than 20% of those violence-related deaths.
Less than 20%. Okay.
But when epidemiologists see that low violence number paired with a suspiciously high number of female accidental burn deaths, alarm bells ring.
Oh.
We have to critically question if intimate partner violence, or IPV, is being systematically miscoded and hidden within the unintentional burn category.
That is just a chilling realization. How does that miscoding even happen structurally?
It happens because of immense cultural stigma, fear of retribution, and financial dependence.
Right.
If a woman is intentionally set on fire by a spouse in a domestic violence incident, she may arrive at the hospital and, out of sheer terror or coercion, tell the intake nurse that a cooking stove tipped over.
And the hospital just records it as an accidental thermal injury.
Yes, and then the death certificate records it as an accidental thermal injury.
Yeah.
And the global database logs it as an accident.
Wow.
This highlights exactly why a purely statistical radar is insufficient. You cannot take raw epidemiological numbers at face value in global health.
No, you really can't.
You have to understand the deeply entrenched sociocultural dynamics that are generating that data in the first place.
That is a masterclass in why public health requires sociological intelligence, not just math.
Absolutely.
And the downstream effects of all these deaths, whether from RTIs, drowning, or violence, are economically catastrophic. Let's look at the financial crater this leaves behind.
The economic burden is massive.
Globally, the annual economic cost of road traffic injuries alone is estimated at $518 billion US.
518 billion.
That covers medical care, property damage, and the massive loss of future productivity.
But the burden is not shared equally.
Mm-hmm.
In LMICs, the estimated cost of RTIs is roughly $65 billion a year.
Okay.
That number might seem smaller than the global total, but context is everything. That $65 billion exceeds the total annual amount of international development assistance those countries receive.
Right, really. Let that sink in for the listeners. Every single dollar of foreign aid pumped into these countries to build schools, dig wells, and vaccinate children is entirely wiped out by the economic destruction of car crashes.
It is an economic hemorrhage.
And it happens at the microeconomic level of the household, too. We established earlier that the victims of RTIs are predominantly young adult males.
Yes.
In places like India or Bangladesh, that demographic is very often the primary or even sole breadwinner for an extended family. When that kinetic energy transfer shatters their spine, the household economy collapses overnight. It triggers this cascade of poverty. Older children are pulled out of school to work. The family reduces food consumption, leading to malnutrition in younger siblings.
And beyond the cold economics, we must acknowledge the profound, intangible costs.
Right.
There was a landmark qualitative study conducted in Mexico that interviewed families who had lost someone to a road traffic crash.
What did they find?
The researchers found that the event doesn't just drain the bank account. It structurally shatters the stability of the family unit. Surviving members reported a deep, lingering damage to their fundamental sense of life purpose.
Oh, wow.
It's a psychological trauma that reverberates through generations.
So if you are a medical trainee or a public health official staring at this data, you are looking at a $518 billion crisis that is killing 5 million people, destroying families, and wiping out national economies.
It's paralyzing.
It really is. How do you possibly begin to dismantle a problem of this magnitude? You need a blueprint.
You absolutely do.
Which brings us to the operational frameworks of intervention.
Right. If there is one concept from this deep dive that every clinician listening should commit to memory, it is the Haddon Matrix.
The Haddon Matrix.
Developed in the 1970s by Dr. William Haddon, who was actually the first administrator of what became the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
Okay.
Haddon took the epidemiological triad and crossed it with the dimension of time.
I find the best way to visualize the Haddon matrix is to imagine an injury as a movie timeline.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
You have the scene leading up to the pre-injury phase.
Yeah.
You have the slow motion, violent millisecond of the crash itself, the injury phase. And you have the chaotic aftermath, the post-injury phase.
Right.
The matrix allows us to hit pause at any of those 3 points in the timeline and rewrite the script.
Exactly. And at each of those 3 temporal phases, Haddon requires us to look at 4 distinct columns of intervention.
What are they?
The human host, the vehicle or equipment transferring the energy, the physical environment, and the sociocultural environment.
Yeah.
This creates a grid, a 12-cell matrix of opportunity. And this framework maps perfectly onto the classic public health tiers of primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention.
Let's clearly define those tiers for our medical listeners because they are the bedrock of board exams.
Definitely.
Primary prevention operates in the pre-injury phase of the matrix. The goal is to completely prevent the energy transfer from ever initiating.
Right.
So if you put a complex child-resistant cap on a bottle of bleach, you're modifying the bottle in the pre-injury phase. The child never opens it. The chemical energy is never transferred.
Perfect example. Secondary prevention operates in the injury phase.
Okay.
The event is already happening, the car is crashing, the energy is being transferred, but our goal is to mitigate the severity. We want to reduce how much of that energy the host absorbs.
So padded boxes?
Padded boxes, seat belts, motorcycle helmets, and deploying airbags are all secondary prevention. They don't stop the crash, but they increase host tolerance during the crash.
And tertiary prevention is the post-injury phase. The crash happened. The kinetic energy was absorbed. The femur is broken. Now the goal is rescue, survival, and rehabilitation. This is the ambulance response time, the trauma surgeon in the ER, the physical therapist helping the patient walk again.
Exactly. And what makes the Haddon matrix so revolutionary is that it scientifically proves the futility of relying on human behavior.
How so?
Well, if you look at the matrix, interventions that rely solely on the human column, like telling a teenager to drive carefully or telling a toddler not to touch a hot stove, those are the absolute weakest links.
Because we're human.
Because humans are fallible. They get tired, distracted, and intoxicated. The most effective public health interventions operate in the structural columns: the vehicle, the physical environment, and the sociocultural environment.
Let's trace the story of the seatbelt through the matrix to prove this point, because it's a great example. The seatbelt is arguably the most successful secondary prevention tool in human history.
Without a doubt.
But it didn't save lives just because some engineer invented it.
Not at all. It required a multi-decade systems-level war across the entire matrix.
Walk us through it.
First, you had engineering in the vehicle column. In 1968, the U.S. government mandated that manufacturers install seat belts in all new cars.
Okay.
But having the belt in the car didn't mean people wore it. In the early 1980s, voluntary usage was hovering around a dismal 11%.
11%. That's nothing.
And educational campaigns pleading with humans to wear them largely failed.
So they had to attack the sociocultural column. They had to use the law.
Exactly. But even legislation requires nuance. States started passing seatbelt laws, but many were secondary enforcement laws.
Meaning what?
This meant a police officer could only write you a ticket for not wearing a belt if they had already pulled you over for something else, like speeding.
Ah, okay.
It didn't change behavior much because the perceived threat of consequence was low. The massive leap in survival only occurred when states shifted to primary enforcement laws.
Where they can pull you over just for the belt.
Yes. This meant police could pull you over and fine you solely for being unbuckled. That structural sociocultural pressure, combined with the vehicle engineering, is what finally drove usage rates up to the 80 and 90% we see today.
That perfectly illustrates how different layers of society have to work together. Which leads us to the second major framework in the Oxford text, the social ecological model.
Right.
If the Haddon matrix tracks the timeline of the injury, the social ecological model tracks the concentric circles of influence surrounding the human being.
Exactly. The social ecological model forces us to realize that an individual does not make decisions in a vacuum. The model operates on 4 concentric levels.
Okay, let's go through them.
The innermost circle is the individual level. This includes biological factors like age, gender, bone density, and personal psychological risk tolerance.
The next circle out is the interpersonal or relationship level.
Right.
For a toddler, this is the degree of parental supervision. For a 16-year-old, this is the intense peer pressure from friends sitting in the back seat of the car, egging them on to drive faster.
The third circle is the community level. What are the physical and social characteristics of the specific place you live?
Like urban versus rural.
Yes. Are you in a dense urban center with public transit? Or a rural area where driving long distances is mandatory? What are the safety standards enforced at your local school or factory?
Okay.
And finally, the outermost circle is the societal level. This encompasses broad national safety cultures, macroeconomic stability, the quality of the national healthcare system, and the presence of federal laws.
The beauty of this model is showing how the outer circles can protect the inner circles.
Oh, absolutely. Give me an example.
Let's say you have an 18-year-old male at the individual level who has a high risk tolerance. At the interpersonal level, his friends are pressuring him to speed.
Okay, high-risk situation?
Right, if we only rely on the inner circles, he crashes. But if that teenager lives in a society with strict primary seatbelt laws and automated speed cameras, that's the societal level, and he is driving on a road designed with physical traffic calming measures. The community level, those outer structural layers act as a heavy buffer against his individual poor judgment.
The system absorbs the human error.
Exactly.
And that concept, the system absorbing human error, is the perfect bridge to our case studies. We have the theoretical frameworks. Now we must see how applied public health actually executes them.
Let's do it.
And what becomes immediately apparent is the absolute necessity of differentiation. You cannot take a successful intervention from a high-income country and blindly paste it into a low-income country.
Because the contexts are too different.
The risk profiles are fundamentally alien to one another. Let's start by applying these frameworks to road traffic injuries.
Okay. In high-income countries, the public health victory has been a slow, painful transition from a car culture to a safety culture. And the undisputed global gold standard for this is Sweden's Vision Zero paradigm.
Vision Zero, introduced in Sweden in the late 1990s, is a profound philosophical shift.
How so?
For a century, the paradigm was, humans make mistakes, crashes happen, so we must train better drivers. Vision Zero flipped it.
Wow.
The core tenet is that human life and health are paramount, and therefore no loss of life is acceptable on the road transport system. It openly acknowledges that humans will always make mistakes.
Because we're human.
Right. Therefore, the responsibility for safety falls not on the driver, but on the designers of the system.
The engineers.
The road network itself must be engineered so that when a human inevitably fails, the resulting kinetic energy transfer remains below the threshold of fatal tissue damage.
It's the ultimate padded box, and they achieve this through an obsessive focus on the vehicle and physical environment columns of the Haddon matrix. They mandate extreme crashworthiness in vehicles, crumple zones, side curtain airbags, shatterproof glass, but more importantly, they redesign the physical environment using traffic calming.
Traffic calming is fascinating. The concept actually originated in the Dutch city of Delft in the late 1960s.
Really?
Yeah, residents were horrified by cars speeding through residential neighborhoods and injuring children. Instead of just putting up a slowdown sign, which we know doesn't work, they physically altered the geometry of the streets.
How?
They created the Woonerf, or living street. They removed the straight, wide asphalt. They put in brick paving, raised crosswalks, artificial curves, and physical barriers like planters. They engineered the physical environment so that it was psychologically and mechanically uncomfortable for a driver to go faster than a walking pace.
The road naturally forces compliance, but here is the critical differentiation. You cannot take the blueprint of a Dutch Woonerf or a Swedish highway and drop it into rural India or a bustling commercial artery in sub-Saharan Africa.
It would be disastrously ineffective. In LMICs, the risk profile of the community and societal levels is entirely different.
Right.
You are dealing with rapid motorization that has vastly outpaced infrastructural development. You don't have a homogeneous fleet of modern airbag-equipped sedans.
No.
You have a highly complex mixed vehicle fleet. Picture a major, undivided, poorly paved roadway. You have heavy commercial trucks driving at 100 kilometers per hour, sharing the exact same asphalt with 50cc scooters, animal-drawn carts, human-powered rickshaws, and pedestrians carrying goods.
The kinetic energy disparities in that mix are terrifying.
Oh.
If a commercial truck hits a donkey cart, there is no crumple zone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Haddon matrix interventions in LMICs require a foundational systems approach. Before you can worry about automated braking, you have to build the literal capacity of the state to enforce basic traffic laws.
So you did the foundation first.
Right. You have to physically separate the most vulnerable road users from the high-mass vehicles by building dedicated scooter lanes and raised pedestrian walkways. You have to implement strict regulations on commercial trucking hours to combat driver fatigue. It is a completely different tier of systemic engineering.
The necessity of geographic differentiation becomes even more stark when we look at our second case study, drowning.
Oh, yes.
If you ask someone in a high-income country to picture a drowning intervention,
Oh.
they immediately think of recreational environments.
Right. In HICs, drowning is largely associated with leisure. It happens in backyard swimming pools, at summer camps, or at the beach.
Sure.
And the public health interventions are straightforward primary prevention aimed at the physical environment. We implement municipal building codes that mandate four-sided isolation fencing with self-latching gates around private pools.
And lifeguards.
We employ certified lifeguards at public beaches. We run public education campaigns about identifying rip currents.
But look at the epidemiology of drowning in an LMIC setting, specifically a place like Bangladesh.
It's completely different.
In Bangladesh, drowning is not a recreational tragedy. It is an omnipresent, everyday environmental hazard.
Every day.
For children under 5 years old in many parts of Asia, drowning is a leading cause of death. And the environment is fundamentally different. A single rural agricultural district in Bangladesh might contain 50,000 ditches, ponds, and open bodies of water.
50,000.
Water is everywhere. It is used for washing, for cooking, for agriculture.
You cannot mandate four-sided fencing around 50,000 agricultural ditches. The HIC intervention is completely structurally incompatible with the LMIC reality.
Right, it just doesn't work.
So public health researchers had to innovate at the interpersonal and community levels of the social ecological model. They realized they had to separate the host from the hazard in a way that fit the daily life of a rural village.
And their solutions are incredibly pragmatic.
They really are.
They use simple door barriers, literally a wooden board across the threshold of a home, to prevent a toddler from wandering out while the parents are distracted. They manufacture locally made playpens to physically restrict the child's movement while the mother is doing chores.
But the most innovative community-level intervention they deployed was the establishment of community creches.
Explain what that is.
They're essentially village-based daycares. Researchers identified that the vast majority of pediatric drownings occurred during a specific window of the day, usually mid-morning to early afternoon, when parents were intensely occupied with agricultural work or domestic chores, and supervision lapsed.
That makes sense.
By establishing a central creche and gathering the children together under the dedicated supervision of trained community women during those high-risk hours, they completely removed the children from the environmental hazard.
That is primary prevention at its finest. You aren't just putting a fence around the water, you are pulling the children entirely out of the reservoir of danger.
Yes.
And our third case study, burns, requires the exact same localized systemic thinking. In the US or Europe, severe pediatric burns have plummeted due to highly centralized, invisible infrastructure.
Yes. HIC burn prevention relies on massive societal-level engineering. We mandate hardwired smoke detectors in all new construction.
Right.
The CDC has funded programs that installed over 500,000 smoke alarms in high-risk, low-income homes. We use national plumbing codes to regulate the maximum temperature of residential hot water heaters to 120 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent scalding.
We pass federal consumer protection laws requiring children's sleepwear to be manufactured from flame-resistant textiles.
All structural. But transition to an LMIC, and those societal-level regulations are useless if the infrastructure doesn't exist.
You can't regulate a water heater if there is no water heater.
Exactly. In many low-income regions, the primary risk factor for childhood burns is rooted in the daily mechanics of basic survival and cooking.
The environment is a powder keg. Families are living in cramped, single-room dwellings. They are cooking multiple meals a day over open fires or rudimentary floor-level stoves fueled by biomass or unstable kerosene.
Yeah.
Toddlers are playing and crawling within inches of open flames. A hardwired smoke detector does nothing when the house is intentionally filled with cooking smoke every evening.
So the intervention has to become hyper-local community engineering. You work with families to physically partition the dwelling, separating the cooking area from the sleeping and playing area.
Okay.
You design simple, culturally acceptable raised platforms so the stove is elevated off the floor, out of reach of a stumbling toddler. You educate on the safe storage of kerosene to prevent accidental ingestion, or catastrophic spills.
And this localized approach scales up into one of the most fascinating multidisciplinary public health initiatives in the world, the UN's Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. The goal of this alliance is to get 100 million clean, safe, engineered cook stoves into LMIC homes. And what makes this intervention brilliant is how it attacks multiple global crises simultaneously.
It's a systemic multi-solve. By replacing a floor-level open fire with an enclosed engineered stove, you obviously achieve your primary goal.
Right.
You drastically reduce severe pediatric thermal burns.
Right.
But what else happens? You eliminate massive amounts of indoor air pollution. The smoke from indoor biomass cooking is a leading cause of severe pediatric respiratory illness and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in women.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of that.
So you are simultaneously solving a massive infectious and chronic disease burden. Furthermore, these engineered stoves are far more thermally efficient, meaning women have to spend significantly less time foraging for firewood, which actually protects them from interpersonal violence in remote areas.
That is incredible.
And on a macroscopic scale, reducing biomass fuel consumption addresses environmental deforestation and carbon emissions. One piece of vehicle engineering in the Haddon matrix cascades into localized trauma prevention, biological health, and global climate protection.
That is the ultimate public health victory. But as we move into the final phase of our conceptual framework, we have to face a grim reality.
Which is?
Despite all of our primary and secondary prevention, despite the clean cook stoves, the seat belts, the crushes, and the traffic, calming the laws of physics dictate that kinetic energy will sometimes still exceed human tolerance.
Yes.
The crash will happen, the burn will occur. And when the matrix fails, how does the system respond? This brings us to tertiary prevention, the post-injury phase, and the critical issue of global trauma capacity bingo.
Tertiary prevention is a race against the clock. The entire goal is to reduce the time interval between the transfer of energy and the delivery of definitive medical care. And the global disparity in this capability is perhaps the most shocking metric in the entire textbook. We measure this through pre-hospital mortality, the percentage of trauma victims who die before they ever reach the doors of a hospital.
Okay, let's hear the numbers.
In the United States, a high-income country with a mature 911 dispatch and ambulance system, pre-hospital trauma mortality is roughly 59%.
59%.
In Mexico, a middle-income country, it rises to 72%. But in Ghana, a low-income country, 81% of all trauma deaths occur in the pre-hospital setting.
81%. That means 4 out of 5 people who sustain a fatal injury in Ghana die on the side of the road, in a field, or in the back of a private car. They never even see a triage nurse.
And this is why organized trauma systems are paramount. Historical evaluations in high-income countries have definitively proven that implementing a formalized, regionalized trauma system, which includes standardized field triage protocols, dedicated rapid transport, and tiered specialized trauma centers, reduces overall injury mortality by 20 to 40%.
That's a huge reduction.
One major epidemiological analysis actually estimated that if LMIC case fatality rates for severe trauma could simply be brought down to match HIC levels, we could save over 1.7 million lives every single year.
But here is the massive roadblock. Building a fleet of advanced life support ambulances, staffing a dispatch center, and outfitting a level 1 trauma center with CT scanners and neurosurgeons is astronomically expensive.
It is.
If a country's entire health budget is consumed by malaria and HIV, how on earth do they bridge that trauma gap?
They bridge it through low-cost, high-impact strategies that formalize the reality of their existing environment.
Like what?
Well, in many rural LMIC areas, formal ambulances are a myth. When someone is hit by a truck, they are transported in a private taxi, a commercial minibus, or the bed of a pickup truck.
Right.
Instead of waiting decades for a fleet of Western-style ambulances, public health experts propose formalizing the existing informal network. You provide basic, standardized first aid and hemorrhage control training to the local taxi drivers and commercial truckers.
Oh, that's brilliant.
You empower the private citizens who are already acting as the de facto emergency response system.
That is incredibly resourceful. And what about when they actually reach the rural district hospital?
You focus on administrative and logistical optimization, not just expensive hardware. You don't need $1 million MRI machine to save a trauma patient.
Right.
You need the basic diagnostic equipment, the portable X-ray, the chest tubes, the IV fluids to be physically accessible and functioning the exact moment the patient arrives.
Yeah.
You need the single on-call doctor to be trained in the basic principles of advanced trauma life support. Capacity building is about maximizing the resources you already possess.
And the World Health Organization has taken the lead on this. The textbook outlines their 3 domains for global capacity building: human resources, institutional capacity, and networks.
Yes, the WHO recognized that you cannot just parachute Western surgeons into an LMIC for a week and expect systemic change.
No.
They developed Teach VIP, which is a comprehensive open-access curriculum designed to transfer foundational injury prevention and trauma care knowledge to local medical schools.
And there's a mentorship program too, right?
More impressively, yes, they launched Mentor VIP. This is a structured 12-month program that pairs junior researchers and clinicians in LMICs with leading global injury prevention experts. They build a critical mass of highly trained indigenous professionals who deeply understand their local sociocultural environment and can advocate for the exact kinds of differentiated strategies we've been discussing.
So if we look at the board, we have the data. We have the conceptual frameworks like the Haddon matrix. We have proven, scalable interventions ranging from Vision Zero to localized playpens. We know exactly how to build low-cost trauma systems. The roadmap to saving millions of lives is sitting right in front of us.
It is.
But there is a massive systemic roadblock that left me stunned when I read this chapter. It is the funding disconnect. Let me lay out these numbers.
Go for it.
When you look at external development assistance directed to health sectors in low-income countries, the global community spends roughly $2 to $3 for every healthy year of life lost to infectious diseases. Do you know how much they spend per daily lost to injury? 6 cents.
6 cents.
It is an insulting fraction. 6 cents for injuries versus $3 for infectious disease. And this is despite the fact that injuries are the leading cause of death for the youth of these nations. Why is the gap so massive? How does the global health community justify this?
They don't justify it. They are blinded by it.
How so?
If we bring this entire deep dive full circle back to our opening metaphor, this funding gap exists entirely because of a persistent fatalistic societal bias. Society, policymakers, and major philanthropic funding agencies still implicitly view infectious diseases like malaria, TB, or HIV as invading biological entities that happen to a victim, and therefore we have a moral obligation to cure them.
Right.
But despite all our data, society still views injuries as random accidents. They view a car crash or a fall as a personal behavioral failing, a momentary lapse in judgment, or unavoidable bad luck.
And governments don't fund structural interventions to cure bad luck.
Exactly. If a politician believes a motorcycle crash is just a young man being reckless, they won't allocate millions of dollars to redesign the highway. This is the absolute crux of injury prevention. The language we use dictates the funding we receive. If we continue to use the word accident, we implicitly accept the mortality.
Yeah.
If we force society to reframe injury as a structural, environmental, predictable disease of energy transfer, we can demand the structural funding required to engineer it out of existence.
Reframing the language reframes the funding. Before we move to our final consolidation for the medical trainees, I want to ask you to project these frameworks into the future. What is the next major frontier for injury prevention that public health needs to prepare for?
I think the most provocative challenge on the horizon is how the Haddon matrix will have to adapt to artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles.
Oh, interesting.
For 50 years, the matrix has maintained the human host and the vehicle as 2 distinctly separate columns of intervention. But when an AI system becomes the driver, the human behavioral factor is suddenly subsumed entirely into the vehicle engineering factor.
Wow.
When a line of code decides the speed limit at the braking distance, how does liability shift? How does primary prevention change when we are no longer educating humans, but auditing algorithms?
That's a huge shift.
And critically, from a global health perspective, how will we ensure that this immensely expensive proprietary new technology doesn't simply widen the existing mortality gap? Will HICs get crash-proof AI pods, while LMICs are left dealing with a discarded, aging fleet of human-driven cars? That is the next great equity challenge.
That is a fascinating thought experiment. The matrix is definitely going to have to evolve. All right, before we wrap, since this deep dive is doing double duty as a companion to the Oxford textbook for our medical listeners, we always end with a high-yield consolidation. Let's run through 6 core frameworks with a ratted single best answer format. I will read the prompt, pause briefly so you can lock in your answer, and then give the solution and the chapter reference. Let's do this.
Ready.
Question 1. In the epidemiological triad applied to the disease of injury, what represents the true agent of the disease?
Think about the physics.
Answer. Energy, whether mechanical, thermal, electrical, or chemical, energy is the agent. Reference the causal model of injuries section of your text.
Great. Next one.
Question 2. According to the Haddon Matrix, legislation requiring manufacturers to install shatterproof glass in a motor vehicle represents an intervention at which phase of time and which factor?
I'm Lyman Call.
Answer. The injury phase, which makes it secondary prevention targeting the vehicle factor.
Right.
Reference the theoretical basis for injury prevention section.
Spot on.
Question 3. Globally, according to the burden of disease data, which age and gender demographic accounts for the vast majority of road traffic injury fatalities?
A demographic heavyweight.
Answer. Young adult males. Reference the global burden of injury section.
Unfortunate but true.
Question 4. While drowning in high-income countries is typically associated with recreational activities, what is the primary context and exposure for childhood drowning in low-income countries like Bangladesh?
Think about daily life.
Answer. Everyday domestic and agricultural activities near local bodies of water, such as ditches and ponds, due to ubiquitous environmental exposure. Reference the successful injury prevention strategies. Drowning section.
Exactly. The environment dictates the risk.
Question 5. The implementation of a sweeping, paradigm-shifting national traffic safety policy, such as Sweden's Vision Zero, operates primarily at which level of the social-ecological model?
Which circle of influence?
Answer. The societal level. Reference the risk factors for injuries section.
The outermost circle.
Question 6. The primary mechanism by which formalized, organized trauma systems representing tertiary prevention save lives is by reducing what specific, measurable metric?
The race against the clock.
Answer. The time interval between the injury event and the delivery of definitive medical care. Reference the successful injury prevention strategies, acute care section.
Perfect.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive. The next time you are in the clinical setting and the doors swing open to a patient with a fractured femur or a severe thermal burn, don't just look at the damaged tissue in front of you. Zoom out, look upstream, look at the predictable equation of energy, the matrix of factors, and the societal systems that failed to intercept that energy before it reached the host.
Well said.
Here are the details of this episode.
Injury prevention.